my question was, how does Christian accounts of the resurrection compare to other religions that came before, such as Zoroastrianism or like the Egyptian god Horus? And how do you believe that impacts or doesn't impact kind of Christian claims about Jesus and how that all went down?
Yeah, a good question. So dying and rising gods and pagan myths and other religions, right? So today, amongst critical scholars, there is a universal consensus that the Christians did not borrow from those. In 2001, a senior Swedish scholar named T.N.D. Menninger wrote a monograph, The Riddle of Resurrection. And he says in there that it is the universal consensus of scholars that the Christians did not borrow from ancient Near Eastern religions and pagan myths. But he goes on to say that there were at least 3 and perhaps as many as 5 that predate Christian, where you do have dying and rising gods in these ancient Near Eastern A&E religions. I think he is a very careful scholar. He argues well, but I don't find a few of his to be compelling. I do think that there are a few examples of dying and rising gods or heroes in pagan myths that predate Christianity. But there are a number of reasons for saying, for even thinking, for rejecting those, the historicity of those for one thing, but even more important, for thinking the Christians did not borrow from those. Let me just give you maybe 3 reasons. So number 1, think of who the earliest Christians were. They were pious Jews who were committed to even the minutiae of the Jewish law. So they debated over issues. We see this in Paul's letters and the book of Acts. They debated over whether Christians could eat meat that had been sacrificed to idols. They debated over whether Jewish Christians were permitted to eat in the same room as Gentile Christians. They debated over whether Gentile male Christians needed to be circumcised. They debated over whether Jewish Christians needed to maintain the temple purification rites. So when you're going to debate over the minutiae of the Jewish law to this extent, do we really expect that these same pious Jews are going to engage in wholesale borrowing from pagan myths to form the foundation for their own? Not a chance. Especially when we read accounts by Josephus and stuff that by Pilate allowing Roman standards to come into Jerusalem that had depictions of the image of Caesar on them, that all these Jews rushed to Caesarea and were willing to be executed by Pilate to protest this. And they put their necks out and they said, we would rather be beheaded right here and right now than for our city to be defiled. So of course the early Christians aren't going to do that. Second, you can find parallel details in just about anything. So many of us are aware of a plane that took off from Massachusetts one morning, and just after 9 a.m. it flew into one of the tallest skyscrapers in the world in New York City, killing everyone on board. Between the 78th and 80th floors, I'm referring to the B-25 that flew into the Empire State Building on July 28th, 1945. Now, probably most of you thought I was referring to the 767 that flew into the South Tower on 9/11. But no, this thing I just referred to actually happened. And if you do a search for it online, you can find photographs of the aftermath. It took off from the same state, flew into a skyscraper in the same city, the same floors, in the same hour of the day. It's coincidence. Has no relationship whatsoever. And so I could give so many examples of this. And you could even make it sound good. 1,000 years from now, it could be a historian says, yeah, 9/11 never happened. I mean, after all, look at the symbolism behind it. The thing at the B-25 actually flew into the Empire State, but 9/11 didn't. The symbolism, 9/11, who do you call when you have an emergency? 911. What was the emergency? Well, the United States was undergoing the greatest economic recession in its history up to that point. So the plane that flew into the planes that flew into the World Trade Center was to symbolize that the economy was bad in the U.S. The plane that flew into the Pennsylvania farm field was symbolic that all of this was impacting the average American. The plane that flew into the Pentagon was symbolic of the declining influence of the U.S. around the world. You can modern mythologize and make anything sound right. But when it comes down to it, it's like, what's the evidence? We've got evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. We don't for these other things. And the final thing I would say is we should expect, peppered over time, stories of people returning from the dead. Why? Well, you think about this for a moment. There's a lot of romance novels and romance movies, and they're fictitious. Why? Romance is attainable by most people. So why do you have the fictitious accounts? Because it's a longing of the human heart. We can't get enough of it. So you make up stuff. Well, life in antiquity, and in fact in many places in the world today, is very brutal. I have some friends in Pakistan, and they alert me. There's this girl, I can't tell you her name, but in January of last year, she was kidnapped by Muslims. She's like 13 years old, okay? She was kidnapped by Muslims, forced to marry a much older Muslim who made her beg for money and trafficked her, put her up for prostitution. Christmas Eve, they found her and they rescued her and brought her back home to her parents. Well, just about a week ago, she got snatched up again. So you can be praying for her. This happens all the time in Pakistan and to Christian women. So life is brutal for a lot of people. We want to know that the evildoers are going to be punished. We want to know that the righteous are going to be rewarded. We want to know that this life is not all there is. That poor girl, if she ends up spending the rest of her life like that, we want to know that that's not at all. And so you could expect, apart from a real resurrection, we could expect for stories to pop up of people coming back from the dead to tell us there is an afterlife, that people are punished, the wicked are punished in an afterlife, and the righteous, those who follow God, are going to be rewarded. So we would expect those fictitious stories to pop up. But that doesn't do anything to discount real romance or stories that are strongly evidenced that someone actually came back from the dead.